On a freezing winter morning in Seattle, thick layers of fog still hovered above the curved glass roof of the National High-Speed Rail Station. The first light of day had only just begun to pierce through the white blanket of snow covering the hallway, reflecting faintly off the glass doors and polished floors. The city was still half asleep, but inside the station, everything had already begun moving smooth and synchronized like a perfectly programmed machine. Among the hurried crowds dragging suitcases past glowing departure boards and security gates, a sharp, commanding figure stood out. It was Nora Blake, 30 years old, one of the most experienced officers on the station's security team. Her gait was decisive, her eyes sharp behind anti-fog tactical glasses. Nora was known not only for her precision and calm in crises, but also for her constant companion Juno, a 4-year-old Malinois canine who had already become a legend in the rail security world. Juno didn't need a leash. He moved gracefully by Nora's side like a loyal shadow, his ears always alert, eyes scanning each passenger and bag that passed through the checkpoint. Other members of the team called them the Sixth Sense Unit, as if Juno could sense things no machine ever could, and Nora the one person who always understood his silent language. Just a year ago, it was Juno who helped uncover a crate filled with explosives carefully hidden inside a traveler's suitcase lining. The chemical scent was faint, almost undetectable, even to the most advanced scanners. But Juno picked it up, and Nora, without hesitation, gave the order to halt boarding. That decision saved hundreds of lives that day. Now, as her breath formed wisps in the icy air, Nora adjusted her leather gloves, glanced down at Juno, and murmured, "Looks like a quiet morning. But we stay sharp, don't we, partner?" Juno answered with a brief, focused glance, then resumed his steady stride beside her. None of the passengers nearby knew that this quiet presence, a woman and her watchful canine, was the first and most formidable line of defense against any threat lurking beneath the calm surface of the city. That morning at Seattle's high-speed rail station seemed like any other. But something in the air made Juno unusually tense. His eyes swept across the passengers preparing to board the SF-9221 bound for San Francisco. Security scanners chirped softly. Luggage glided across conveyors and announcements echoed across the gleaming concourse. Nora stood at the central control desk, eyes trained on the lead car's cockpit area. The train was scheduled to depart in less than 20 minutes. Everything appeared smooth until Eli Rowan, a rail technician, emerged from the front carriage. He wore the correct uniform, a navy blue technical jacket with the train operator's logo, a name badge on his chest, and an ID clipped to his pocket. He walked briskly, but without urgency, glancing occasionally at a handheld tablet, muttering under his breath, perhaps double-checking safety parameters, a standard procedure for someone in his role. But when Eli got within 5 meters, Juno suddenly stopped. His ears shot up and his back arched slightly in a defensive posture. Nora immediately sensed the shift. She frowned and turned toward her partner. "What is it, Juno?" she whispered. A second later, Juno let out a low, guttural growl. Not the type used for strangers, but one deeper. The kind he used only when warning of danger. Eli froze. He looked up slightly annoyed, noticing the canine now blocking his path, eyes fixed on him. Nora raised a hand, stepping forward. "Excuse me, are you Eli Rowan?" "Yes," Eli replied curtly, his voice tinged with irritation. "I need to inspect the pressure sensors. I've worked this line for 4 years. Everything's in order." He held out his technician ID toward Nora, but his eyes remained locked on Juno, who was now barking loudly, his fur bristling. The dog tugged forward, trying to bar Eli's path physically. This wasn't a misfire. This was instinct, a warning. Nora had worked with Juno long enough to know the difference. No system flagged anything unusual, but Juno didn't react like this without a reason. She looked straight at Eli, her voice calm but firm. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step aside and come with me for a secondary inspection." "What?" Eli's voice rose in protest. "I'm a certified technician. You can't detain me just because your dog's having a bad day." A few nearby passengers turned to look. Some appeared nervous. Others are merely curious. But Nora didn't flinch. She signaled quietly to 2 nearby security officers. "This is protocol when the K9 unit issues a high alert response. Please cooperate. It'll only take a few minutes." Eli inhaled deeply as if weighing his options. Then slowly he dropped his shoulders and gave a reluctant nod. "Fine, but I'm reporting this completely unnecessary." As the officers escorted Eli through a side corridor, Nora knelt briefly beside Juno, running a gentle hand down his back. "You sensed something, didn't you?" Juno didn't bark again, but his eyes stayed locked on the direction Eli had gone, ears alert, body tense. Nora suddenly felt a chill, not from the cold, but from knowing one thing with certainty. Juno had never been wrong. She reached for her radio. "This is K9 Unit 7. Activate Advanced Screening Protocol. I want a full inspection of that technician's gear uniform and tool case." What happened next would confirm it all and prove that a single growl from one dog had prevented something far worse than anyone imagined. Juno had stopped barking, but his eyes remained fixed on Eli until the man disappeared down the auxiliary hallway. His ears were still perked, and his body remained tense. Nora suddenly felt a chill, not from the cold, but from the instinct that Juno had never once been wrong. She reached for her radio and called into the central command. "This is K9 Unit 7. Activate the Advanced Inspection Protocol. I want a full check of the technician's luggage uniform and equipment." A few minutes later, inside the isolation area, Juno reacted strongly again as he approached Eli's toolkit. Despite metal detectors revealing nothing unusual, Juno pointed directly at a wrench inside the toolbox. When security technicians unscrewed the handle of the wrench, they discovered a tiny circuit hidden within. Not an explosive, but a device that could be used to activate an electronic mechanism remotely. Eli was immediately detained for questioning. The full picture was still unclear, but the clues were beginning to align. And it was Juno's unusual behavior, seemingly instinctive, that had sparked the beginning of a much more dangerous investigation. The secondary inspection room, buried deep within the station, was bathed in cold fluorescent light. The gray rubber flooring and sterile concrete walls offered no warmth. There was no sound save for the soft hum of scanners and the tapping of keyboards from the tech team. But the tension in the room was heavier than any wall could contain. Nora stood just a few feet away from Eli, who sat with his arms crossed, leaning back in his chair. His expression was cold, almost bored, as if this entire ordeal was beneath him, yet his eyes no longer as calm as before occasionally flicked toward Juno with visible caution. "We'll begin inspecting your belongings now." Nora said, her voice calm, though her mind was racing. "This is standard procedure." "Go ahead," Eli snapped. "I have nothing to hide." Two technicians began to remove each item from the tool bag. Pliers, screwdrivers, handheld controllers, everything appeared normal. No metal detectors or magnetic scanners picked up anything suspicious, but Juno wasn't convinced. The Malinois remained locked on Eli's shoes. He moved closer. Nora allowed him free movement within the room. Lowering his nose, Juno carefully sniffed the area under the man's soles. Then a low growl. Quiet but sharp enough for Nora to treat it as an alarm bell. "Remove his shoes," she ordered quickly. Eli bolted upright. "Hey, this is going too far." "Sit down," Nora said firmly. "If you have nothing to hide, you'll walk out of here in 5 minutes. But if you do, well, we'd all rather know now than later." A security officer approached, gesturing. Eli grumbled, stomped his foot once, and pulled off his shoes. The thick rubber soles were carefully stitched, but under the technician's magnifying scope, something unusual stood out. One seam didn't match the others. "Here," the technician said, "this sole has been tampered with." He gently peeled away the rubber, and inside was a tiny circuit board. No battery, but a clear contact point commonly found in wireless signal transmitters. The room's atmosphere shifted instantly. Eli paled. Nora said nothing. She turned to Juno, who was now standing next to the tool case again. "Check the bag," she commanded. Initially, the bag was scanned and found to be clear. But with Juno still reacting, they decided to dismantle it piece by piece. Juno barked sharply as one technician sliced open the fabric lining and carefully peeled back a glued seam at the bottom. A wafer-thin piece of metal slid out like a silver ribbon. "Conductor strip," the technician noted, his voice tightening. "This isn't a loose component. It was built into the structure." Nora's brow furrowed. "Check the train cockpit, specifically the secondary control panel, and any electronics near the technician's seat." The command was relayed immediately. Another tech security unit was dispatched to the front cabin of train SF-921, the same one Eli had approached earlier. Back in the inspection room, Eli remained silent. His hands were clenched, his gaze now fixed on the floor. Gone was his earlier confidence. Less than 10 minutes later, a voice crackled over the radio. "We've found an unauthorized device embedded in the auxiliary control board. It's small, well-concealed, and doesn't appear in the official schematics. Sending images now." Moments later, the screen lit up with a photo. A microcircuit no bigger than a fingernail fused directly into the main panel, completely invisible without disassembling the board. An on-site electrical engineer confirmed, "This is a remote override unit. If triggered, it could disrupt the track safety system. At full speed, that could cause a derailment." The room went silent. Nora turned slowly to Eli, care to explain this. Eli gave a slow shake of the head and smirked. You should have listened to your dog sooner. It wasn't a denial, and in that moment, the truth became undeniable. Juno had just prevented a catastrophe. Had it not been for the dog's response, the high-speed train carrying over 200 passengers might have left the station with a planted mechanism that could have sabotaged its controls at 300 kilometers per hour. Nora glanced at Juno. He was sitting calmly now, eyes still fixed on Eli. This wasn't just obedience, it was instinct. It was precision. And in a world run by codes, sensors, and automation, sometimes a single bark was the only thing standing between normalcy and disaster. The image on the screen was chilling. A microcircuit no larger than a fingertip embedded seamlessly into the main control board, so well hidden that it would have been impossible to spot without completely dismantling the panel. An on-site electrical engineer confirmed grimly, this is an override device. It can remotely disrupt the safety signal system of the rail. If triggered while the train is traveling at full speed, the chances of a derailment are extremely high. The room fell into silence. Nora turned to Eli, care to explain. He shook his head slightly, a smirk curling at the corner of his lips. You should have trusted your dog sooner. That wasn't a denial. At that moment, the truth hit harder than any alarm ever could. Juno had just prevented a catastrophe. Without the dog's reaction, the high-speed train carrying over 200 unsuspecting passengers could have left the station racing down the tracks with a sabotage device wired to disrupt it at 300 kilometers per hour. Nora looked down at Juno. He was sitting still, silent as always, but his eyes hadn't left Eli for a second. This wasn't just obedience. This wasn't just instinct. It was precision, the kind no machine could match. And in a world where everything is digitized, automated, and monitored by algorithms, sometimes it's a single bark that separates routine from disaster. The interrogation room at the station now felt like a completely different place. Every pair of eyes was locked onto Eli Rowan, or rather the man who had stolen that name. He sat silently between two federal agents. The cold confidence from earlier now washed away. What had transpired in just over an hour had shattered the carefully constructed persona he had hidden behind for years. Before him lay a thick case file, page after page, detailing evidence that would bring any liar to their knees. Nora stood off to the side, arms crossed, her gaze unwavering as she watched the man once known as Eli slowly unravel. Eli Rowan, the lead investigator, was a real signal engineer for the National Railway Corporation, but he was terminated nearly 3 years ago for gross violations of safety protocols. According to personnel records, he's now living in Idaho under a new profession, completely unaffiliated with this industry. The investigator leaned in. You are not Eli Rowan. So who are you? The man lifted his eyes. After a long pause, he sighed. You're right, he said, finally dropping the act. I'm not Eli, but soon enough everyone will know my name. He gave a faint smile, almost peaceful, not deranged but resolute, as if he believed what he had done served a greater truth. Behind the scenes, a forensic tech team had already begun analyzing the equipment recovered from the train, the microcircuit embedded in the control panel, the transmitter hidden in the modified shoe sole, and the altered tools. They were all pieces of a larger puzzle. This wasn't the work of a lone disgruntled worker. This was a coordinated effort, deliberate and sophisticated. Tracing the digital data embedded within the confiscated devices, the team uncovered a trove of encrypted files. And when they finally cracked them open, what appeared on the screen stunned everyone in the security division. Detailed data schematics of major U.S. high-speed railway lines, internal documentation of automatic control systems, simulations predicting derailment damage at various speeds. Most disturbingly, there is a document titled Cyber Manifesto, Protocol for Infrastructure Resistance. It wasn't just a plan, it was a declaration. The language was impassioned and accusatory. It condemned modern transportation systems as enslaved by blind trust in infallible machines. The author argued that governments had grown complacent, ignoring critical vulnerabilities in favor of convenience and profit. To shake the system awake, action was necessary, not to kill, but to disrupt, to force society to look again at the foundations it stood on. So who was the man behind the mask? His name was Marcus Dahn, and he was once hailed as a gifted engineer known for his innovative solutions in the rail signaling industry. However, a fierce disagreement with senior leadership over unreported system flaws led to his suspension and eventually his firing. After that, Marcus vanished from the professional world. He resurfaced in the shadows of the darknet, where he joined a radical tech collective. They didn't believe in governments. They believed in liberated information. Their mission to expose the fragility of modern civilization's infrastructure by any means necessary, even if it meant risking lives. Marcus had infiltrated the railway system using forged credentials. He planned to plant the device and then trigger it using the wireless transmitter embedded in his shoe. Once the train reached top speed, the circuit would turn off the safety override, derailing the train without leaving obvious clues. Afterwards, the group would release their manifesto to the world, claiming a responsibility and declaring control is an illusion. But nothing had gone according to his plan. It all changed because of one unexpected variable: a dog named Juno, a 4-year-old Malinois, not coded, not programmed, just trained and deeply loyal. His instincts had disrupted an operation years in the making, and in doing so, he saved countless lives. Would you like me to continue translating the final part about Juno's public recognition? In Nora's closing remarks, there was one factor Marcus hadn't accounted for: Juno. The 4-year-old Malinois wasn't built with code or algorithms. Juno didn't follow scripts. He worked off instinct training and a kind of primal intelligence. No machine could replicate the instinct to protect humans. It was Juno's bark, his sharp, unprogrammed response outside the cockpit, that made Nora step in. That single decision halted the train before departure and prevented what could have been one of the most devastating acts of infrastructure sabotage in U.S. rail history. Marcus was taken into custody, facing a stack of federal charges: impersonating technical personnel, breaching national infrastructure, conspiring to endanger public transportation, and the use of sabotage-grade devices. Meanwhile, rail security teams and federal agents launched coordinated operations to track down the rest of Marcus's group. Data extracted from the seized devices confirmed he hadn't been acting alone. At least 2 other dark engineers had been embedded at strategic infrastructure points across the country. The revelation forced the U.S. government into immediate action, overhauling technician vetting procedures, mandating periodic re-verifications, and upgrading counter-sabotage training across the transportation sector. 2 days later, at a press conference held at the Seattle Center for National Rail Security, the federal director stepped up to the podium and made a statement that would soon be quoted across every major outlet. No system of surveillance can replace the living awareness of our 4-legged partners. And today we honor a very special dog, Juno, who uncovered what no machine ever could and stopped a disaster before it began. Nora stood quietly beside him, gently reaching down to stroke Juno's head. The dog remained calm, his posture alert, his eyes still watchful. She whispered, "Good job, buddy." One bark saved hundreds of lives. That same morning, in the Grand Hall of the National Transportation Security Center, every seat was filled. Reporters, government officials, security leaders. They were all there, lights from cameras glinted off the polished stage. To the left, the American flag, to the right, the seal of the Federal Transport Authority. But at the center of it all stood a silent, majestic figure with 4 legs, Juno. The Malinois sat upright, body sturdy, eyes scanning the audience. Around his neck hung a gleaming K9 badge, catching the light with every flash. In front of him stood a crystal plaque engraved with the following: honoring K9 hero, Juno, for bravery, loyalty, and an unparalleled instinct in preventing a national sabotage attempt. Date, month, year. The applause was thunderous as a Department of Transportation official stepped forward, presenting Nora with a certificate of merit and pinning a commemorative badge to her uniform. But then he turned toward Juno and bowed his head. The entire hall rose to their feet. The second round of applause was even louder, warmer, raw with emotion. When Nora took the podium, she hesitated for just a second. She was used to dry technical briefings, not hundreds of eyes and blinking red cameras. She didn't pull out her notes. Instead, she looked at Juno, then at the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice steady, "my job is to monitor behavior and respond in complex security situations. I work with dashboards, sensors, scanners, systems that are programmed to alert us when something's wrong." She paused. The room was still, but the one thing that wasn't programmed that morning was Juno. She took a deep breath. No system taught him to bark at the right person at the right time. No one instructed him to question what the machines approved, and no one but him sensed danger buried beneath the disguise of protocol and uniform. Turning to Juno, her eyes glimmered with pride. "We can invent 1,000 types of screening systems, but nothing Nothing can replace the loyalty and instinct of a four-legged heart that loves and watches over us. The hall erupted again, this time with cheers and even a few whistles of admiration. Several attendees in the front rows wiped tears from their eyes. No one in that room was untouched. In the hours that followed, headlines spread like wildfire: canine dog stops, decade's biggest rail sabotage plot. Juno, the silent hero of the digital age. One bark changed the fate of 200 lives. And while the country marveled at the high-tech nature of the attempted attack, what resonated most deeply was the truth everyone now acknowledged. Sometimes in a world run by machines, it's a single bark that saves us all. The story spread quickly, not just within the security community, but across the public sphere. People began to understand, perhaps for the first time, the irreplaceable role of working dogs. These quiet heroes operate in the shadows of train stations, airports, and checkpoints, serving with no demand for recognition, but with unwavering purpose. That afternoon, after the ceremony had ended and the applause had faded, Nora returned to her post at the Seattle rail station, the familiar place where it had all begun. She gently removed the metal ribbon from Juno's neck and replaced it with his regular patrol collar. Juno lay down beside her, resting his chin on her boot, as if the honors and headlines had never happened. No glory, no pride, no expectation. He was simply a partner, ready for the next mission. Nora sat down beside him, running her hands softly over the short, sleek fur at the back of his neck. "Well done, Juno," she whispered. "But tomorrow we're up early as usual." Juno opened one eye and glanced at her. His ears perked briefly before folding back down, a subtle gesture, as if to say, "Copy that, boss?" Perhaps the most powerful part of this story isn't the disarmed device or the unmasked saboteur, but the quiet reminder that instinct, loyalty, and trust will always be our strongest line of defense in the modern world. We can build artificial intelligence, layer our systems and firewalls, and automate every gate. But sometimes all it takes is a look from a creature that doesn't speak a growl, not found in any line of code, to signal the truth. Juno wasn't manufactured in a lab. He was raised through training, trust, and love, nurtured by humans, and in return, devoted to protecting them. And maybe that bond, so simple, so silent, is what shields us more reliably than any digital security ever could. As the camera pulls back, we find them in a quiet corner of the station. The light of dusk spills across the snow-speckled floor. Nora is seated on a bench reviewing case files. Beside her, Juno lies still, eyes open, ears twitching to every muffled announcement from overhead. There's no triumphant music, no second ovation, just a regular afternoon. But right there at that moment, our hero remains on guard. No spotlight, no medals, just the quiet satisfaction of doing the right thing and protecting what he believes is worth saving.